Hey folks, thanks for joining us for another Rocket Matter and Florida Bar webinar. My name is Nefra McDonald. I'm the Business Development and Strategic Partnership Coordinator here at Rocket Matter. And today we're talking about key law firm profitability metrics every lawyer should know. And we are very excited to have as our guest presenter today, Matt Vohm, the CEO and co-founder of Tally, which is a voice-driven timekeeping assistant powered by Amazon Alexa. Before I let him take it away, I did want to let you know a couple of housekeeping items. So in your GoToWebinar control panel, you will see a questions widget. All questions should go there. If you have any questions as we're digging into the material today, throw them in there and I will make sure that Matt gets to them either during the presentation or in a dedicated Q&A time after the presentation is over. We will have contact information for both of us at the end of this as well. The CLE number will be given at the end of the presentation. So make sure that you stay until the end and I will be giving that out as well. The slides and recording will be sent tomorrow at noon. So take a look in your inbox for those so you don't have to take profuse notes, but I would suggest that you pay attention and get those questions answered while you have access to both of us. And this is presented by Rocket Matter. Rocket Matter is the leading cloud-based practice management software. We were founded in 2007. Lawyers use us to go paperless to have more confidence in their trust accounting, and we're trusted by thousands of attorneys all across the country. We are Florida-based, and we are a Florida Bar member benefit. Tally is soon to be your newest Florida Bar member benefit, which we're very excited about as well. This is also presented by Legal Fuel. Legal Fuel is the former Florida Bar Practice Resource Institute, and they're dedicated to bringing you great information and resources to run the best business and law firm that you can. So with all of that, I will let Matt take it away. And Matt, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Awesome. Yes, thank you, Nefra. It is great to be here. And yeah, so a little bit about me. Like Nefra said, I am the CEO and co-founder of Tally. Tally is a next generation timekeeping platform powered by voice technology like Amazon Alexa. We are fortunate enough to have Rocket Matter as an integration partner, and that means that you can keep your time and log your time with your voice and sync that directly to Rocket Matter with the click of a button to completely eliminate the chore of manual time entry. In addition, I am a self-proclaimed finance dork. So I grew up in Wisconsin. I'm a Wisconsin native. That means I'm a big Green Bay Packers fan. And that's where I did my undergrad, where I double majored in accounting and finance. And then after that went on to get my MBA from Berkeley. But I'm now living in Portland, Oregon. And I am married to a lawyer. Which means I lose every argument at my house because my wife is really good at her job, and I'm the father of 2 boys. And so, I described myself as a finance geek with a finance background, and today we are going to talk about numbers, but the good news is you do not need to be a financial wizard or even a numbers person to get value out of the conversation today. And the reason why we're having this conversation is because I ultimately want to make sure that you're able to get answers to some key questions that you may have, at least ones that I've heard over and over again over the last year and a half since talking to a lot of different law firm customers of ours. And I get a lot of questions around, what should I charge? How do I know if I'm charging enough or if my billable rate's in line with my competitors? Or am I charging too little? Another question I get a lot of is, should I bill by the hour or should I look at doing flat fee arrangements? And so our goal for today is to walk you through a couple of key things that you can do, that every law firm can do, that every lawyer can do to get answers to some of these questions. And I've broken things down into 5 steps for you when it comes to looking at how you can price your legal services. So the first, which may seem obvious, but it's think about the products that you're offering. And we're going to talk in more detail about all these things, but here specifically it's about really getting as narrow as you possibly can. So yes, you are delivering legal services, but that is not your quote unquote product. So we're going to talk a little bit about how you can get narrow, evaluate your niche and your unique value proposition to really ultimately determine what it is that you're selling. The next thing we're going to look at is your revenue model, specifically around, kind of bill by the hour or flat fee, or even things like subscription based, and how you can evaluate a couple of key things to really determine which one of those revenue models is right for you. The next couple of steps may be more unfamiliar than the first two things that I just talked about, but this is really, two of the key things that, as we go through the next couple of slides, if there are two things that I want to make sure you remember following this discussion today, it's really step 3 and 4. And that is considering your customer acquisition costs, meaning how much money do you need to spend to get a new customer or get a new client. We're going to walk through a couple of examples of that and things to consider, and how every law firm, every lawyer, including all of you, can figure out and calculate that number for your law firm. Step 4, we're going to look at how you determine your case value and your customer lifetime value. And so again, these two steps here are critically important. Step 3 is how much money does it take you to get a new client in the door? And step 4 is really how much business value do you derive from a client over the course of their lifetime? And the reason why those are so incredibly important is because they will ultimately determine whether or not your law firm will be sustainable in the long term. And so that's why really I want to focus most of our time on those two things. But then to make sure we give a complete picture of really pricing and financial performance, we also want to make sure we understand our fixed costs, which are what are the things that you need in place to support your law firm, whether you have one attorney or 100. And so to start, I want everyone to just think through the product that you're offering. And so this may be uncomfortable for some. I promise we're not looking at how we can kind of commoditize the work that, the great work that you all are doing. But ultimately, at the end of the day, whether you're a legal technology company like Tally or you're an attorney providing legal services, you are ultimately selling a product. And so the thing that I want everyone to think about here is really what is your niche? Kind of how narrow can you get? In the example of Tally, when it comes to a technology company, we are voice-driven timekeeping for solo and small firm attorneys that use one of our 3 integration partners, right? So very specific, very narrow, and very kind of targeted in terms of the product that we're selling and who we're selling to. So same thing goes on the legal side. Are you a real estate attorney with a subject matter expertise in environmental liability issues? Are you a family law attorney who primarily serves and has a really great understanding of all the rules and regulations that govern same-sex couple adoption in your state or in a certain country? Those are all things, the more narrow you can get, the more targeted you can get in understanding what your niche is, the better you can get at defining what it is that you're ultimately selling. And the reason why that's important is because as you evaluate some of these key profitability metrics, you want to make sure that you're looking at cases or work that you're doing that is consistent rather than lumping in a bunch of different things that may not be apples to apples. So think about the product you're offering, get as narrow and as niche as you possibly can. On the revenue side, when you look at your revenue model or step 2 and you're considering things like, should I bill by the hour? Should I move to flat fee, contingency, subscription, all of the above, a mix? Really the main things to consider, and really the place that I would start is first, market demands. Same thing, whether, again, going back to me at Tally or you as a law firm, start with what your customer wants and what your customer is demanding. Are you serving small business owners who may want to pay for stuff as things pop up for them. So maybe they want a billable hour rate. Or maybe you're serving primarily startups, and startups have limited budgets, and they also want an idea of cost of services up front. That could be a great opportunity for them to demand a flat fee arrangement from you. But taking it one step further, you also need to consider the operational requirements around those things and whether or not pricing flat fee or billable hour makes sense. So if you bill by the hour, you'll obviously need to keep track of your time and make sure that you can invoice that time. So you want to make sure you have technology solutions in place, things like Rocket Matter, Tally, other timekeeping, invoicing, and billing solutions that can do that for you. If you do flat fee, you still need to be able to invoice your time, but you also need to keep your time and still track your time. And the reason why is because you have to come up with some price point that is a flat fee. And the only way to do that and to understand if you're actually making money when you price things at a flat fee is to understand how much effort you're spending on those flat fee arrangements. And the second thing to consider when it comes to flat fees specifically is the level of variation that may be project to project, which again is why you still need to keep your time if you're doing flat fee arrangements. So specifically, if your clients want flat fee and if the work that you're doing is relatively consistent project to project, that's a great candidate for something that can be priced and delivered on a flat fee. However, if there's a lot of variation in the type of work that you do, then flat fee is likely not a great pricing structure for you, and the billable hour may be more appropriate. So again, just a couple of things to consider there as you look at what your revenue model is. And so now I want to get into a little bit on customer acquisition cost. So the truth of every business, every law firm, every technology company out there is that it costs money to acquire new clients. And customer acquisition cost represents the time, the effort, and really the marketing dollars that you spend on getting leads and ultimately converting those leads into paying customers. And so I want to walk through just a couple of examples of a hypothetical situation here and how you can look at the data that you have available within your law firm to come up with your customer acquisition costs. So where I would start is look at the data that you have available. It's best if you can do things over the course of 3, 6, 9, or 12 months. Preferably you have 12 months of data available. And the things that you want to consider when you look at sales and marketing costs for your law firm are first the cost of your time. So if you do business development, if you attend networking events, if you do other things that require your time, hours spent of your day, that needs to be considered when you look at your customer acquisition costs. Other things are, any digital ad spend, any money you're spending on billboards, any money that you're spending on targeted mailings, print, anything that is related to sales and marketing that's more of a hard cost is something you also want to consider in evaluating what's my total sales and marketing spend, because that ultimately is what you're going to use as the foundation for determining your customer acquisition cost. So the main thing here is, the targeted mailings, the advertising spend, that's probably obvious to you all, should be a relatively easy number for you to get. The less obvious thing is the cost of your time. Just make sure you're considering that in any calculations that you run. And so in this example here, we've looked back at 12 months of data, and we come up to $32,000 of total sales and marketing spend. The next thing to look at is how many new clients have you been able to acquire over that same time period. And from there, the math is really straightforward. Take the amount of sales and marketing you're spending divided by the number of new clients that you have, and that gives you the first step of your customer acquisition cost number, which in this case is $533. The last step, though, to consider is, again, and the piece in the description is converting leads into paying customers. So if you have a final step that, say, involves consultations, you need to look at how many people are you doing consultations for if you're doing free consultations, And of those consultations or meetings, how many of them ultimately convert into paying customers, right? So if you meet with 10 people every month and you convert 50% of them, 5 of them, consider that amount of time, right? If it's an hour per consultation, that's 10 hours of your time. Take your salary, convert it to an hourly rate, multiply it by 10, and divide it by that number to appropriately get the last piece, which is, this case, the cost to close the lead is an additional $75. So that in total brings us to a customer acquisition cost of just over 600 bucks. And so that kind of walk through, those are the things that you want to consider when getting to this number, which is ultimately then going forward, if you need to grow your business, and if you need to invest in sales and marketing efforts, this is going to be your foundation to tell you, if you invest X number of dollars, how many new clients can you get? After you get to the first number of how much does it cost me to acquire a new customer, you then need to look at, well, what's my case value, and really how much kind of value can I get from this customer over the course of their lifetime. And customer lifetime value really represents the amount of business value, or essentially profit margin, that is received over the course of that customer's lifetime, whether their lifetime is 12 months, 24 months, 10 years. But it all starts with when they first come in the door, looking at how much revenue are you getting from them on a case-by-case basis. And so in this case, on the top example, we have a real estate attorney that bills by the hour. So if that is you, first take a look at how many hours are you typically spending per case to serve that client, and look at your billable rate and just do the math. In this case, 15 hours multiplied by 250 is just shy of $4,000. Next, look at, well, how much money am I spending to do that work? In this case, 20 hours of work results in 15 billable hours, meaning you write some time off. Make sure you're considering that in your calculation. And then again, get to your equivalent hourly rate if you're taking a salary, and just do the math to determine how much money that's costing. You can see here we've got around a 60% margin on that case, and in looking at our data, we see that we have 3 cases typically per client over the course of their lifetime, which means our customer lifetime value, or LTV, is around $6,700. So that's one example of how you can do that math. Another simple example below, when it comes to a traffic attorney that, say, does flat fee billing, same type of thing. How much are you charging on a flat fee per case? How much time does it take you to serve that particular case? And then how many cases will you get from that client over the course of their lifetime? So the main thing to consider is really, are your clients kind of one and done, meaning you do one thing for them and that's the extent of their lifetime, or do you generate repeat business from them, in which case you don't need to acquire them every time they come back in the door. So that's the main reason why you want to get to a customer lifetime value number and case value, and some examples of how you would ultimately do that.
All right, Matt, let's pause here for a second, just make sure everyone's doing okay, because we just digested a lot of information there, quite a few numbers. Throw any of your questions in the questions widget, but I also did want to pause and let you know that looking at these numbers is really going to get you to a point where you can start to easily offer alternative fee arrangements. We've done a CLE on this in the past, on how you can start to readily offer some alternative fee arrangements, whether it's flat fee or a hybrid agreement where you're doing maybe a little bit of contingency and then a reduced hourly, or reduced hourly across all timekeepers. There's a lot of ways that you can start to think about things when you're regularly looking at these numbers and trying to get projections, because you're still going to be able to be profitable in this respect and bring in more money for your business when you can offer your clients an alternative fee structure that can make you a little bit more competitive. So definitely something to think about. Don't see any questions coming in. So Matt, let's keep it rolling.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Nefra, is that the goal of all of these things is that first, you don't need to get complicated to do any of this. But at the end of the day, it does all come back to your clients, your customers, and what they're ultimately demanding. If they're looking for alternative fee arrangements and you want to continue to serve them and have them as a client, you need to be able to meet their needs. And at the end of the day, you need to still be able to make money in order to continuously meet their needs. And so, it's why understanding the type of data that you need and understanding how everyone can run some simple calculations is really critically important to just, again, making sure that you set yourself up for long-term financial success and you're able to meet the needs of your clients. So definitely very, very critically important for folks. So up to this point, and we're at the last step kind of in the 5 steps here, but so up to this point, we've talked about, all right, so what's my, what product am I offering? How do I kind of figure out whether I bill by the hour or do flat fee where I can have, a hybrid of both? How much money does it cost me to acquire a new client? And how much margin can I generate from that client over the course of their lifetime? So the last step is to understand your fixed costs, which are really how much money are you spending to support your law firm as a whole, whether you're one person or 100, what does that look like on an annual basis? So this will be things like legal technology. Are you paying for timekeeping, practice management? Are you, other, whether it's subscription services or annual licenses? What are the things that are kind of powering your law practice that you're paying for on an annual basis? Those are one example of fixed costs. If you have an office, right, there might be some variability depending on how large you are, but at the end of the day, there's going to be essentially a fixed cost component to how much money are you spending on rent every month, every year. And then 2, support staff, right? Whether, if you have a couple of team members and maybe you have an office manager or a receptionist, typically those are going to be able to scale up whether you have 5 attorneys or 10. So that's another example of a fixed cost. So this last component is really making sure that you capture a complete picture of where you're spending your time, where you're spending your money, so that you can essentially put it all together to evaluate and try to understand. And so that's where I want to go next, is really how can you now kind of put all of this stuff together, but ultimately, what does it all mean? So let's start by just taking some of the things that we talked about. So let's use a hypothetical example here of our product being, let's say we're a real estate lawyer located in Portland, Oregon, and we're an expert in environmental liability issues for developers and contractors. So this is a great place to start. You can see how we narrowed in on kind of a specific thing that we're able to deliver to our clients. Again, the more narrow, the more niche that you can get, the better. Next step is, all right, if that's kind of what I'm selling, how should I sell it or how should I price it? So from a revenue model perspective, you take a look at the type of cases and the work that you're doing. You figure out that, hey, these are pretty unique and complex. There's variability from case to case and client to client. And so my clients demand the billable hour, and that's what will set me up for success as well. So those are 2 things that you consider. One of the things that we haven't really talked about, but data that is available, is when you get to these 2 steps, and you look at, okay, so what am I, if you do bill by the hour, for example, what am I charging today? And really, how does that align with my competitors or with others in the market? There is data out there to get. So there is so Clio, another Tally integration partner, and another practice management tool, they put out a legal trends report every year. So that's a great resource if you're looking at, hey, I'm, an attorney in Las Vegas doing a specific type of work. How does my current rate compare to markets, to other attorneys in that same market? So there is data out there available for you to just get a sense of first, after these first 2 steps, how do I stack up against others within my marketplace? And that's a great way to also just keep in the back of your head for going through and really looking at where you do end up is, the value that you're delivering doesn't make sense where you are in terms of your competitors. So one other thing to throw out there for folks to consider. Next, we walk through a couple of these things. Again, take a look next at your customer acquisition costs. Main things to consider there: how much time are you spending to acquire new users, networking events, business development, things like that. Take a look, estimate how much time you're spending, and figure out how much that time is worth. And then make sure you're getting a complete picture of all of your other digital advertising, any targeted mailings, billboards, things like that, because the starting point for customer acquisition is sales and marketing. So again, going back to the example we did before, we got our sales and marketing spend, we looked at how many new clients we got, and then we also evaluated how much it costs us to ultimately close that lead. So our customer acquisition cost is just around $600. Compared to the lifetime value of our client, we've looked at data, we've walked through our case history, and we see that we typically spend or we'll typically bill 15 hours per case, and that it takes us on average 20 hours of actual work to serve that client or that case. So we generate around $2,200 of profit margin, which is around a 60% margin. That's a good margin for professional services. And then on the fixed cost front, we look at things like rent, legal technology, bar dues, other miscellaneous expenses. Again, these are things that we're spending annually, whether we have one person or 20, and they're things that are not typically directly attributable to revenue, but just kind of costs of doing business. And so what does that all mean? And so again, the things that are really important when you look at customer acquisition costs and lifetime value are the scalability of your law firm and whether or not you can be sustainable in the long term. So the first thing that you can do once you have these numbers is look at, well, how long does it take me to recoup my customer acquisition costs? In this case, we looked, and it takes us where we spend about $600 to acquire a new customer, but we generate $2,200 of profit, meaning that, and that's on a per case basis, meaning that we recoup our customer acquisition costs around 27% of the way through our first case with that client. That's a good thing. If you look at technology companies, folks outside of the legal services sector, a good rule of thumb is that you like to recoup your customer acquisition costs within the first year of that person or that user, whatever it may be, being a customer. But at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you definitely recoup your costs within the first case that you do. So in this case, by the time you're a quarter of the way through, you recoup your customer acquisition costs. And that's a good thing, because that one tells you that you probably have some additional room to spend when it comes to acquiring users. Again, whether that's spending more of your time or just spending more money on sales and advertising. So that's one thing to consider once you have this data available. The other thing is that you make money over the course of a customer lifetime. So if you generate $2,250 of profit per case and you get 3 cases per client over the course of their lifetime, that's an 11x return on investment per customer. And so when you look at customer acquisition costs, lifetime value, those two things are really described financially as unit economics. You have a really strong ROI on customer acquisition. Anything above 4 to 5x return is a relatively strong number. And so again, this means that, one of two things. It means, one, you can spend more money on acquiring new customers, or you could potentially lower your billable rate if you also think that would mean you could get more customers in the door. And that's where, too, the other thing when it comes to billable rate is comparing yourself to the market. So if I'm looking at an 11x return on investment, maybe my billable rate is a little higher than the market. If that's valued because I have a lot of experience in this particular field, then that all makes sense. But it could also mean that I may just be priced a little high compared to my competitors that are able to do the same thing, in which case I can lower my price point a little bit. And the last thing to look at is that you do in fact have a scalable business model. So the thing that customer acquisition costs and lifetime value tell you is, in the long term, if these are my unit economics, can I ultimately make money? From a business perspective, there's always a lot of things that you can do in the short term to kind of survive. But if you have unfavorable unit economics, you might be able to correct that in the short term by doing some things, but those band-aids will eventually be torn off and you will not succeed. So that's why these things are critically important. So if we just look at how you can then do some quick calculations with these numbers, you can look at, okay, if I'm generating $37.50 of revenue per case, and let's say I do 60 cases per year, I'm generating around $225,000 of annual revenue. So let's say I'm a solo attorney. My direct costs, let's say I take a salary throughout the year of $90,000. So that's how much money I'm spending to serve that revenue. So my gross margin is around $135K. I spend another $32,000 on sales and marketing. I have that $15,000 of fixed costs, meaning I'm just shy of $90,000 of income before taxes. So you can just see how, as you calculate these numbers, as you put them onto a pro forma P&L, that if I'm doing this year after year after year, it means that I'm able to serve my clients profitably. I'm able to generate cash to put in the bank at the end of the year to invest in years ahead, and ultimately make sure that I can survive, market volatility, ups and downs, but at the end of the day, that I can survive for years to come. And that's really the whole point of customer acquisition costs and customer lifetime value. And so again, to go back to where we all started, if you remember two things from our time together today, they are around unit economics and really how you can calculate your customer acquisition cost and your customer lifetime value. Understanding and knowing off the tip of your tongue how much it costs you to get a new customer and how much money you can make over the course of that customer's lifetime will ultimately tell you whether or not you have a sustainable law firm in the long term. And again, there's levers that you can pull after you understand this data that is either revenue or pricing driven. So again, billable hour versus flat fee, whether you're above market or below market, you can adjust those things accordingly. The other thing you can do is you can adjust your service levels, right? So if you are spending too much time to serve your clients, then what you need to do is either keep your service levels the same and bump up your rate, or if your rate is already in line with your competition, then you need to look at spending less time on performing that work. So there are things that you can do on the service level front as well. But it all starts with understanding things at the project level, at the customer level, to ultimately determine whether or not you're going to be successful in the long term. And so those are the two things I want to make sure that you can take away from today: customer acquisition cost, lifetime value. Everyone can calculate it. Again, whether you're an attorney, whether you're a technology company, whether you're a financial services firm, this number and these numbers exist for us all, and they're critically important to understanding the long-term sustainability of our law firm. And so with that, Nefra, I'll turn it back to you, and we can walk through any questions or any other things specifically that folks may have had over the last couple of minutes.
Awesome. Yeah. So we're going to get back to the beginning of the presentation when you talked about attorneys needing a niche. So what about attorneys that are general practitioners? How can they calculate something like this when the value of their cases, it's very difficult to determine what the average value is?
Yeah, and so this is where start still get as narrow as you possibly can, which may mean that you're only evaluating a portion of your practice at a time. But at the end of the day, even general practitioners, you may have not just one product, you may have 3 or 4 or 5. And so it's starting with the type of work that you do the most of. These are not the things that are going to be, the one-off type cases that you may do throughout the year. But even general practitioners, you will likely see patterns or themes in the type of work that's being done. And it's just evaluating those cases specifically to really run through these calculations. And especially for those that may have multiple kind of practice areas. The other thing that this can tell you, right, is if you look at the data, if you evaluate your caseload and you see, hey, I'm doing typically 5 different types of things. And, this first type of thing that I'm doing is actually pretty profitable, but I'm not doing a whole lot of it. But hey, guess what? This thing that I'm doing a lot of, it turns out I'm actually not making any money on. And so that can influence where you ultimately go with your practice as well. You may end up either turning work down or kind of quote unquote firing existing clients if it means that you're able to devote that effort and that capacity elsewhere. So that's another thing that this data can tell you is what type of customers and what type of work is ultimately most profitable for you, and how can you do more of that, especially if you do have the ability to do more. If you're turning work down, you could see yourself turning work away that you may be able to make a lot of money on in favor of doing more work that actually isn't as profitable. So that's where even general practitioners can still get narrow. They may have a couple of different products that they're quote unquote offering, but you can still get to the data. You can still figure out these numbers for your firm.
Do you have a resource for people to look up where they can find how their competitors are pricing their services?
Yeah, so there is. So the main thing that I've used, and I think that has been out for a couple of years now, is that CLEO Legal Trends Report. So there is a downloadable PDF if you do a Google search for that or go to CLEO's website that you can download, and it's got a lot of really good data in there. Not only like market rates for, like I said, lawyers in by practice area in specific geographies, but also a lot of really insightful data in terms of, hey, how many hours are attorneys typically billing on a daily basis. That's another thing that can drastically play into your kind of your unit economics, right? According to the Legal Trends Report, lawyers are spending just above 2 hours of billable time every day. So they're not, 2 hours out of a 8, 9, 10, 12-hour day. And it's because a lot of time is devoted to administrative work. So that's another thing where, as you look at the type of cases that you're doing, how much time you're spending on them, you can really get a sense for the time you're spending on non-billable activities, and that does play into that fixed cost component of the work that you do. And again, will impact whether or not you're financially successful in the long term with your firm. But that is also something that is easy for you to address, and that technology solutions, like Tally, like Rocket Matter, others can help you with. So that's one really great resource that is out there.
Okay, and then how do people get to the calculation for it's an overhead plus, right? So what determines like what is okay for them to charge once they've covered overhead?
Yeah, so I think the best way to break stuff like this down is kind of variable versus fixed costs, and the best way to do that is just say, okay, what's directly attributable to revenue, and everything else kind of falls into that fixed costs bucket, right? So stuff that's directly attributable to revenue is going to be the time the attorney's spending on the case. It's going to be the time they're spending on business development. There's clear and obvious stuff that is attached to generating $1 revenue for your firm. And then I would say everything else would fall into the overhead bucket. Things like technology, receptionists, support staff, stuff like that. I think the main thing there is if it's not obvious that it's attached to a revenue generating activity, put it in the overhead bucket. Because as you can imagine, you can get super, super detailed with all of these calculations, but the truth of the matter is that you don't get a lot of value out of going really, really in depth. So you can get a lot of value from doing things on the surface, and even just starting to bucket some of those things between variable and fixed, or overhead and revenue generating, is a great place to start.
Okay. What about people doing online marketing where the cost per click can vary and all of that good stuff? How do you factor that in? Should they, have a larger budget and maybe just stay within that? Like, how do you factor that in?
Yeah, I think, look at where you've been spending money in total, when it comes to sales and marketing. Before, in our example, we had come up with a $600 customer acquisition cost. And from there, if that is sustainable, and if, primarily a lot of that is coming from, SEO, Google stuff, you have the opportunity to spend more, because you can see that it's, you're spending $600 on customer acquisition, but you're generating, almost $7,000 in margin over the course of that customer's lifetime. And so you've got room to spend more on digital advertising. And that's too where then if you say, okay, let me focus just on digital advertising, you can also look at, okay, how many customers am I acquiring through that specific channel? And how much money am I making on them? Versus, doing that same comparison when it comes to targeted mailings, or like anything you can attribute to your billboards, stuff like that. So you can definitely get more narrow, especially when it comes to where you're spending money on sales and marketing. But at the end of the day, you need to start with at least a high level kind of in total, what do things look like? And then you can get more, more focused from there if needed.
Okay, we got one that came in. My customer acquisition cost is way too high, but I'm scared to stop doing what I'm doing for fear of getting less clients. Okay, how do I tackle this?
Yeah. So there's two levers to this whole thing, right? You're spending money to acquire customers, and you're generating margin from those customers. So in order to, the way the math works is you either need to increase one number on the margin side, or decrease your cost. So you have two things. You could increase your price point, support that in the value that you're providing. Maybe high touch on the acquisition side means that you're also high touch on the service delivery side. So you can support an increase in your price. The other thing you can do is, if you're spending too much on customer acquisition, it could mean that you're priced too low compared to market. So look at where others are pricing their services. But if you do look at revenue, if you look at pricing, if you determine ultimately there's nothing you can do on the pricing side, then you need to spend less money on your customer acquisition. And that's where it comes to looking at, well, where am I spending most of my money when it comes to acquiring new users? Is it because I'm going to all these events and I'm spending too much time on it and I'm not seeing the ROI? That could be one area where you could decrease your customer acquisition. If you're doing stuff specifically on sales and marketing, like if you are, say, spending a lot on cost per click with Google, and you're not seeing a return there, you can look at, is there a consultant that can help me streamline that? Should I be spending money there, or can I put money elsewhere and see a higher return? Same thing with some of the other areas where you may be spending money, is that you're just not seeing the return on investment from certain things that you're spending your marketing dollars on. And so but at the end of the day, like I said, there's two components. You can either increase your price point to generate more revenue on your customers, or you can decrease the amount of time and the amount of dollars you're spending to acquire new users. But one of those two things will need to give, again, in order for your firm to be successful and ultimately operational in the long term. And so it's just figuring out which one of those things you want to evaluate, where you can pull levers. And then knowing that whether it's consultants or even just evaluating your own time, that there are things you can do within each to make improvements.
Yeah, and I will say in terms of increasing that margin too, our two solutions are really great for that. I'm going to take the last minute we've got here to plug that. You know, Tally is going to be able to help you capture more of your billable time because of, you know, the simplicity of being able to just speak your time as you're capturing it, or as you're doing a task, or as you remember it in the car and you can use your Alexa app. You know, so that's definitely going to help you capture more billable time and forget less. And the other thing too is Rocket Matter. Rocket Matter is going to help you to automate so much of what takes up a lot of your time. So you'll have a lot more free time to either dedicate to that sales and marketing effort or to servicing more customers. So that's how our two solutions can definitely help with those margins as well. So I just threw our CLE number in the chat box. The CLE number is 3105. And so Matt, tell us how people can keep in touch with you and follow Tally.
Yeah, so so you all will be getting these slides, which will have all of our social media handles on them as well. But my contact info is here as well. My email address and my phone number, and our website is telltally.com, telltali.com. And so yeah, like I said, I'm a finance kind of geek at heart, and so I'm more than happy to have any conversations around anything here. Kind of where to look, even help folks kind of run some of their numbers. Happy to help however I can. So you can reach out and talk to me about anything, like I said, email or phone, or we have live chat on our website where you can reach us as well.
Awesome. All right, folks. So again, that CLE number is 3105. If you'd like to learn more about Rocket Matter, you can visit us at www.rocketmatter.com. Follow us on all the socials, all that fun stuff. Enjoy the rest of your day. Matt, thank you so much for an excellent presentation today. Definitely learned a lot.
Yeah, thank you, Nefra, and thank you, everyone.
All right, folks. See you next time.